very well someone who was easily manipulated. We come to find out that the story is very interesting, even in the fact that when we understand that Jacob was very well directed to do some things and take the blessing of his oldest brother, to some people that's stealing. But what we come to understand is that this household right now is full of dysfunction. It's very interesting because even though we're trying to get a blessing, we're full of dysfunction. The mother liked Jacob better. The father liked Esau better. So what do we do when we have a one-sided love relationship? I ain't say I ain't love the other one, but my love for one is greater than the other. And now this begins to establish our argument that this house is full of dysfunction. Not only is the house full of dysfunction, but we come to understand that the dysfunction very well can run rampant through this household because there is a deceiving spirit that is running to take someone else's blessing. The interesting thing about this is that not only does this happen in Esau's house, but many times it happens in our own households. Many times we steal one another's blessing and we're jealous. No matter what kind of dysfunction it is, dysfunction is dysfunction. So now we come to find it to be interesting that their household is very relevant to the household we face on today. It's dysfunctional. Now I tried to understand. I said, okay, well, what is dysfunction? Dysfunction is an impairment of function or malfunctioning as an organ or structure of the body. It's also a consequence of a social activity or a structure that undermines a social system. So I think it's very interesting now that we come to understand the dysfunction of this household. Their dysfunction might be in the deceiving aspect and wanting to bless one more than they want to bless the other. But what about the household to the mother is on drugs? Dysfunctional. What about the household? The child is being abused. Dysfunctional. What about the household that has a lack in finances? Is still dysfunctional. So now I think this is very interesting because I had to look at this from a new perspective. That many of our households, in fact, all of our households are dysfunctional. This very well establish the knowledge that we need God even the more. Why? Because if our households are full of dysfunction, that means that I need him more today than I did on yesterday, because I cannot establish my household properly without him. So now we have many people who try to rule God out, but yet they don't understand their household is dysfunctional. Some people will say, well, I got money. My family good. Well, when you work too much and your children feel no love, dysfunction. See, no matter where we try to go, we understand that we need God even the more because there's so many dysfunctionalisms that can happen in our household to where we can very well be placed into a position of uncomfortability. So therefore, we come into the story and understanding that Jacob very well followed the orders of his mother to take the blessings of his oldest brother. But the daddy said, you know, you have Jacob's voice. Dysfunction. Isn't it funny? Sometimes people have to steal stuff from you when the person who's about to bless you really can't see. Somebody understand that in a moment. What ends up happening is that Jacob could not steal it beforehand. Why? Because the daddy would have saw. But when we come into the chapter of 27, the Bible starts off and it says, and it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim. You know, it didn't say that he couldn't see. It said his eyes was dim. That means he couldn't make out the image that he should have been able to make out. What about that person who's a millionaire that's waiting to bless you with $1 million check? But their eyes are dim. So now I have to do something in order to make sure I am placed into the right position in order to receive my blessing. Because I come to find out, and I think that Esau should have been on his knees so much to where he would have never had this issue very well come to him. So now this establishes a need for prayer in the household to bring functioning ability back to your household. Because I come to find out that Esau should have been on his knees so much that when he very well saw in the realms of the spirit, something was conjuring up against him. I thought it was very interesting because when we go further into the chapter, Esau begs his father, do you have any blessing left for me? Just one. Isn't it funny that sometimes when you get to your lowest point, you're willing to take anything? Dysfunction.
That's right.
Dysfunction.
That's right.
Because when I'm really functioning properly, I'm not going to allow you to give me a piece or a part of what I should have had the whole.
That's right.
But when I'm dysfunctional, I cannot very well receive the whole part of what I'm entitled.
That's right.
Many times God wants to bless many of us, but we have too many dysfunctions in our minds, in our prayer lives, in our spiritual walks.
That's
so
right.
God cannot very well bless a dysfunctional person.
That's right.
Now, I think it's very interesting because when you have a child who very well have some issues, they'll give you a check. Don't act like y'all don't know. Some of y'all probably had checks when we were little. Don't worry. I tried to get a check. Never mind. Nobody want to laugh at me. No, but what happens is that they give you a check. But what that check signifies is that you have some type of dysfunction in your house. So you need extra means of taking care of this dysfunction. So we're going to give you some money to help you take care of this dysfunctional individual because your house have now become dysfunctional. So we're going to pay you to live in this circumstance. We're going to pay you to live with this. So now we find that we have a disabled child and we no longer seek that child's healing because they have paid me to deal with it. Dysfunction. How many of us saints have been paid off to deal with some things in our lives? Okay, somebody will understand in a minute. We have been paid to deal with some things in our lives. So God does not desire for us to stay broken, busted, and disgusted. It's kind of like a person who's on food stamps. Not a problem or anything. But when a person's on food stamps, you have many individuals who's on food stamps and receiving government assistance. But what they end up doing, they don't want to work or anything. Why? Because you have paid me to live in dysfunction. So now I no longer see a need to go to college or go any further because you have paid me to live in dysfunction. So therefore, God legitimately wants to bless you, but he can't bless you because it's too much dysfunction. So now what's ending up happening is that people are taking your blessings because you're not in the right place at the right time. I come to tell you that it was very interesting who very well was the person who was blessing, and it was Isaac. Isaac is the son of Abraham. So we understand that he had a blessing, and he had a big blessing because he had a promise of God. So now when you understand who's the person who's doing a blessing, you'll understand why the blessing wanted to be taken. Some of your enemies see your blessing. So now they want to take it. Why? Because they saw your blessing is too big. They thought you probably needed a little help. And being that you was too slow moving to get to your blessing, they saw that you did need help. You didn't even have to say a word. So they're going to take it for you. So now we begin to find people who very well start to conjure up some things against us. They conjure up lies because the blessing is too big. You ain't moving fast enough. So now they begin to conjure up, talk about you, put you in places and positions and things that you should have never been. Why? Because the blessing is too big. So now if I can't pay you off, I will very well steal from you what was entitled to you. I come to think it's very interesting. Esau literally sold his birthright. He did sell his birthright. He sold it to Jacob. Sold his birthright. So now I think it's very interesting that his brothers sold his birthright, but now he just had his blessing stolen from him. Do you think that's interesting? Sometimes what happens in a dysfunctional household, you'll come to understand that there is a habitual routine that goes on. And we come to know it many times as generational curses. You were broke, so that means your children are going to be broke. Their children are going to be broke. But along the line, there have to be somebody who's going to be a trend changer and say, this dysfunction was not for me.
That's right.
I don't care what it looks like. I know many of my people in my family didn't go to college, but this dysfunctionalism is not for me.
That's right.
I don't care what it looks like. I know people are out there, all my family on drugs, so they expect me to do this. But this is too dysfunctional for me. I understand that many of my family talk about each other and none of them go to church, but this is too dysfunctional for me. Why is it so dysfunctional for me? Because I really come to understand who God is. Right. Now, when you can understand who God is, you can understand what dysfunctional is. Some of the things I used to do, I don't do no more.